Hey, welcome to The Explainer. So, there's this really common belief you hear in Islam that all the great prophets, we're talking Adam, Noah, Abraham, even Jesus, were all Muslims. But what if that idea, and it's a big one, actually contradicts history, language, and maybe even the Quran itself? Well, that's what we're going to dig into.
So let's just jump right in with a pretty provocative question. What happens when a core belief of a religion seems to clash with its own holy book? This isn't just some abstract debate. We're actually going to investigate a paradox that sits right at the heart of how Islam tells its own story.
Okay, so here's the claim we're looking at. It's that the big names, the prophets you know from the Abrahamic traditions, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Jesus, that they were all, in fact, Muslims. And this isn't some minor point. It's absolutely foundational to how Islam sees itself fitting into the grand narrative of world religions.
Now, what's really fascinating here is that this whole thing, it all hinges on one single word, Islam. See, it kind of has two different meanings. On one hand, you have the general, timeless act of submission to God. But on the other hand, you have Islam, the specific religion, with its own laws and beliefs, that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad way back in 610 AD. So the real question becomes, can you use both of these definitions for the same claim without running into a major contradiction? Let's see.
All right, let's tackle the first big problem here. And it really comes down to timing. It's a puzzle of language and history. And the question is actually pretty straightforward. Can you belong to a religion before its language or its specific laws even exists? Think about that for a second.
And this timeline, wow, it really puts that question into sharp focus. The word Muslim, right? It comes from the Arabic root SLM. But look at this. The Arabic language itself didn't even exist when Adam, Noah, Abraham, or Jesus were around. It only started to take shape thousands of years later. So the point is, saying Adam was a Muslim is a bit like saying Julius Caesar spoke English. It's a linguistic anachronism. The word just didn't exist yet.
And that brings us to the other half of this historical problem. The specific religion of Islam, the one we know today, is built on these pillars: the Quran, Sharia law, the Declaration of Faith in Muhammad, and following his example. The thing is, none of these existed before the 7th century. So someone like Jesus, for example, couldn't possibly have followed them. They just weren't there.
Okay, so we've got issues with language and history, but now the argument faces an even bigger hurdle: potential contradictions found right inside the Quran itself. So the question we have to ask is, does the Quran really support this idea that Islam is some ancient, unchanging religion that's been around since Adam? And right away, we see a major point of tension. On one side, you have the claim, Islam is ancient, it's been around forever, unchanged. But on the other side, you have this verse from the Quran itself, chapter 5, verse 3, which says, "Today I have perfected for you your religion." Now that's a bit of a logical puzzle, isn't it? How can you perfect something on a specific day if it was already perfect and unchanged from the dawn of time? It really suggests that the system of Islam was actually something new, something completed at that very moment.
And there's more. The claim is that all the prophets followed the one religion of Islam. But then you look at Quran chapter 5, verse 48, and it says, "To each community we gave a different law and different way." I mean, that sounds pretty clearly like there were multiple systems of law, right? Not just the single, specific Sharia of Islam for everyone.
This really breaks it down plain and simple. Let's just take the 5 pillars of Islam. These are the absolute core duties for any practicing Muslim. And let's ask a simple question. Did Jesus do them? Well, according to the source material, the answer is a clear no for all of them. He didn't confess faith in Muhammad. He didn't pray 5 times a day facing Mecca. No zakat. No fasting for Ramadan. No pilgrimage to Mecca. I mean, how could he? He lived 600 years before any of these practices were even established.
So, our third and, well, final problem comes from a pretty surprising place: Islamic tradition itself. We're not talking about modern critics or outsiders here. We're going to look at what some of the most respected, heavyweight scholars in Islamic history had to say about all this. First up is Ibn Kathir. Now, this guy is a giant, one of the most famous commentators on the Quran ever, and his statement is incredibly direct. He says, Islam, the Sharia, came with Muhammad. And notice he's very specific there. He mentions the Sharia, the whole legal and ritual system. He's drawn a very clear line saying this system began with Muhammad.
Next, we have the famous historian Al-Tabari. And look, he makes the exact same critical distinction. He says Jesus worshipped God, but the Sharia of Islam came later. So he's separating that general act of worship from the specific religious system of Islam. He's saying that system, the religion, came much, much later. It's a really nuanced point that seems to get lost in the modern-day claim. And finally, Al-Ghazali, a hugely influential theologian. He just kind of brings it all home. He says Islam in its complete form is only with Muhammad. So you've got these three major voices right from the heart of classical Islamic scholarship, and they all seem to be saying the same thing. The religion of Islam, as a complete defined system with its own laws, is tied directly to the Prophet Muhammad. It just didn't exist in that form before him.
So, where does that leave us? Well, it looks like we're staring at a pretty inescapable contradiction. When you pile up all the evidence, from language, from the Quran's own verses, and from the words of its own classical scholars, that initial claim that all prophets were Muslims, it seems to completely unravel Islam's own story of its history.
And this leads to what might be the most powerful paradox of them all. Let's just walk through the logic here, step by step. Okay, step 1. The Quran, in chapter 3, verse 55, says that Allah will make the followers of Jesus superior until the resurrection. Step 2. Historically, who were these followers? Well, they were Trinitarian Christians who believed in the crucifixion. Step 3. Modern Islam says those core Christian beliefs are false, a corruption. And that brings us to step 4, the paradox. This would mean that Allah made people who held false beliefs superior for centuries. It's a real head-scratcher.
To make this whole thing crystal clear, let's use a simple analogy. Confusing the two meanings of the word Islam is a lot like confusing exercising with CrossFit. Look, pretty much anyone can exercise. It's a general thing you do. But CrossFit? That's a specific branded system with its own rules, its own book, its own founder. It's the same idea here. Sure, many prophets might have submitted to God in a general sense, but that's just not the same as practicing the very specific, defined religion of Islam.
And that really brings us to the core of the argument. For someone like Adam or Jesus to be called a Muslim, the word Islam has to be redefined retroactively. You have to strip away its actual specific historical meaning. The Quran, the Sharia, the faith in Muhammad, and just turn it into this generic label for anyone who believed in one God. It becomes a redefinition, not a historical fact.
So we kind of end up right back where we started. If this claim, that all the prophets were Muslims, seems to contradict the Quran, history, and Islam's own greatest scholars, well, that leaves us with one last massive question. Why is the claim made at all? What purpose does it serve? And that's the thought we're going to leave you with. Thanks for tuning in.